My name is Emma Sullivan. I'm 37 years old. 10 years ago, I signed a lease on a tiny, run-down storefront with cracked tile floors and a broken oven, and I turned it into Sullivan's Bakehouse, the kind of place where people line up before sunrise for cinnamon rolls, where regulars know my name and I know their orders before they say a word. I didn't inherit a dime to start it. I worked as a line cook for 6 years, saving every spare dollar, learning recipes on my nights off, testing them in my tiny apartment kitchen until my neighbors complained about the smell of burnt sugar at midnight. When I finally signed that lease, I was terrified and broke and more determined than I had ever been about anything in my life. 10 years of 4 a.m. mornings. 10 years of flour under my fingernails and burns on my forearms. 10 years of missing holidays because Christmas Eve was my busiest baking day of the year. I built that bakery bone by bone, and every loaf that came out of that oven had my name behind it, even if it never said so on the label. My parents were proud, or at least, that's what I always believed. Whenever they visited, my mother would run her fingers along the display case, smiling at the pastries lined up like little works of art. "You've built something wonderful, Emma." My father would nod along, quiet but approving. "Your grandmother would be proud. She always loved to bake." Hearing those words meant everything to me. My younger sister, Chloe, was 31. Warm, likable, and utterly incapable of holding on to anything for long. She'd tried hairdressing, then event planning, then a short-lived jewelry business that folded within a year. Every time one of her ventures collapsed, my parents were there with comforting words and, more often than not, a check to soften the landing. I never resented her for it. I told myself every family has someone who needs more support. I never needed anyone to hand me anything. I built my own life, and that felt like enough. Then, 6 months ago, everything changed. My mother called me on a Sunday evening. "Emma, we need to talk. As a family. It's important." I drove to my parents' house straight from closing the bakery, flour still dusted on my sleeves. Chloe was already at the table. So was my father. The room felt different the second I walked in. No one smiled. My mother cleared her throat. Chloe's last venture fell through, and honestly, she's struggling. "We think it's time she found something stable." I looked at my sister. She shrugged, the same way she always did when consequences arrived, like they were simply inconvenient weather. Then my father reached across the table and set his hand over mine. "Emma, we've been thinking. You've built such a strong business. Maybe it's time to let Chloe take over the bakery. You could always start something new." I sat there for a moment, certain I had misheard him. "You want me to give Chloe my bakery?" "Not give," my mother said quickly. "Just, let her run it. Keep it in the family." "It's already in the family," I said. "It's mine." Chloe finally spoke, her voice light, almost dismissive. "Come on, Emma. It's just a bakery. You could open a new one in no time. Just a bakery." To her, maybe. To me, it was 10 years of 4 a.m. alarms, cracked knuckles, and every ounce of my 20s and half my 30s. I stood up. "I'm not handing anyone my bakery." My father's expression hardened. "So you'd rather watch your sister struggle again?" I answered calmly, though my hands were trembling. "I'd rather she learned to build something the way I had to." Chloe slammed her palm on the table. "So you think you're better than me now?" "No," I said. "I just made different choices." The argument dragged on for nearly an hour. Eventually, I walked out, heartbroken and furious in equal measure. As I drove home, I kept wondering how the people who raised me to work hard could suddenly expect me to hand away everything I had built with my own 2 hands. I had no idea they had already begun making plans behind my back, and that within days, I would arrive at my own bakery and find the locks already changed. I barely slept that night. My mother's words kept circling in my mind. "You could always start something new." As if 10 years could simply be rebuilt overnight, like restocking a pantry. The next morning, I opened the bakery like always, pulling the first tray of croissants from the oven before the sun had fully risen. Work had always been my refuge. That morning, even the smell of fresh bread couldn't settle the unease sitting in my chest. 3 days later, my mother called again. "Emma, can you stop by the bakery this afternoon? We'd like to finish the conversation properly." Her voice was unusually bright, and something about that brightness made my stomach tighten. Still, I agreed, telling myself this could still be resolved like reasonable adults sitting down together. When I arrived that afternoon, Chloe's car was already parked outside, next to a car I didn't recognize. Inside, a man in a gray suit sat at one of my cafe tables, a leather folder open in front of him. My father stood as I walked in, smiling like everything was already settled. "Emma, this is Mr. Whitmore. He's a business attorney. We thought it would help to have things explained properly." My stomach dropped. This wasn't a conversation. This was an ambush dressed up in polite language. Mr. Whitmore shook my hand and gestured toward the table. "Miss Sullivan, I understand the family would like to formalize a transition in management. Given your sister's need for stability and your parents' wishes, we've drafted a straightforward handover agreement." I stared at the documents. Business transfer forms. Management agreements. My bakery's name typed neatly at the top, waiting for a signature I had no intention of giving. Chloe leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, watching me the way someone watches an outcome they already believe is decided. "It's not forever, Emma. Just until I get back on my feet." I looked at her steadily. "The jewelry business was also just until you got back on your feet." Her jaw tightened, but she had nothing to say to that. My mother's voice softened, the way it always did right before asking for something. "Honey, this is what family does. We help each other." I took a slow breath. "No. My answer hasn't changed." My father's face darkened. "Think carefully, Emma. If you turn your back on your sister now, don't expect this family to be there for you later." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. I've never once asked this family for help. Not before I built this place, and not after. I stood, pushed the untouched papers back across the table, and walked toward the door. Before I left, I turned around one last time. I love this family, but I will not apologize for protecting what I built with my own hands. Then I walked out, got in my car, and drove home with my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The next morning, I arrived at the bakery before sunrise, the way I did every single day of my life. But something felt wrong the moment I turned the corner. The front door had a brand new lock. A handwritten sign taped to the glass read under new management, "Ask for Chloe." My heart began pounding as I tried my key in the door. It didn't fit. My own key, to my own bakery, no longer worked. I knocked, and a moment later, Chloe opened the door from the inside, an apron already tied around her waist, flour dusted carelessly on her sleeve like she'd seen me do 1,000 times. She smiled. "Oh, hey. Perfect timing. We're just getting things organized." I stood frozen on my own sidewalk. "You changed the locks? On my bakery?" She shrugged, stepping back to let me see the disarray inside, trays out of place, my recipe binder open on the counter. Figured it was easier to just start than wait around for everyone to agree. My parents appeared from the back, stepping into the front room as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "We assumed you'd come around eventually," my father said. My mother added gently, "Family shouldn't fight over a bakery, Emma." I looked between the three of them, my own family, standing inside the business I had built from a broken oven and a cracked tile floor, a stranger's new lock keeping me outside my own front door. This wasn't disrespect anymore. This was theft with a family photo taped over it. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number I hadn't needed in years, my business attorney, the one who had helped me review that very first lease a decade earlier. "Ms. Alvarado, it's Emma Sullivan. I think it's time we talked." Her voice was calm and immediate. "I was wondering when you'd call. Come by first thing tomorrow morning." I hung up and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Chloe laughed softly, shaking her head. Calling lawyers now? A little dramatic, don't you think? I met her eyes without flinching. You forgot something very important, Chloe. For the first time that morning, her confidence flickered. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't answer. I simply turned, walked back to my car, and drove to a coffee shop across town, unwilling to stand outside a building that had suddenly become a stranger's stage set. The next morning, I sat across from Ms. Alvarado in her office, the same office where I had reviewed the bakery's original lease terms a decade earlier, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. Tell me honestly, I said. Can they actually lock me out of my own business? Ms. Alvarado smiled gently and opened a thick folder. No, Emma. They can't. And I think they've forgotten something rather important. She slid a single document across the desk, the original commercial lease, my signature at the bottom, dated 10 years earlier. The lease for that storefront, she explained, is registered solely in your name. Not your parents'. Not your sister's. Yours alone. Any change of locks, any transfer of business operations, requires your written authorization as the leaseholder. What Chloe did yesterday is not a business transition. It's unauthorized entry into a property you legally control. I stared at the paper, my eyes filling with tears I hadn't expected. They never even checked whose name was on it. Apparently not, Ms. Alvarado said. Which means legally, nothing has changed. Chloe has no leasing rights, no ownership stake, and no legal authority to occupy or operate that storefront. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. Meanwhile, back at the bakery, Chloe had already begun rearranging things to suit herself. She'd changed the menu board, started experimenting with recipes that weren't hers to change, and told a friend who stopped by that she was finally getting her own place. This is incredible, her friend said, looking around at the display case. So Emma just handed it over? Chloe smiled. She didn't have much of a choice, honestly. They both laughed, completely unaware that legal reality was already on its way to interrupt the celebration. Around 10 the next morning, a car pulled up outside the bakery, followed by Ms. Alvarado and a locksmith. Chloe stepped outside when she saw them, still confident. Can I help you? Ms. Alvarado handed her an envelope. You've been served with a notice of unlawful entry, along with a locksmith to restore access to the leaseholder. Chloe frowned, tearing it open. Unlawful entry? This is a family business. With respect, Ms. Alvarado said calmly, the lease says otherwise. Ms. Sullivan is the sole leaseholder of this property. Changing the locks without her authorization is a violation of both the lease and the law. My parents rushed out from inside, panic written across their faces. There has to be some mistake, my father said. We just wanted to help Chloe get started. With respect, Ms. Alvarado replied, helping Chloe get started doesn't include locking the actual owner out of her own storefront. My mother's face went pale. But Emma's our daughter. This is a family matter. She's also, Ms. Alvarado said, the only person with legal rights to this property. At that exact moment, I pulled up and stepped out of my car. The entire family turned toward me. Chloe crossed the sidewalk to meet me, her voice sharp. You brought lawyers into this? Against your own sister? I looked at her steadily. No, Chloe. You brought this on yourself the moment you changed the locks on a door that was never yours to lock. My father lowered his eyes, unable to meet mine. We thought you'd eventually agree, for the family's sake. You never asked me, I said quietly. You decided for me, and then you tried to force it while I wasn't even in the building. My mother began to cry. We only wanted to help your sister. And in doing that, I said, you tried to take away everything I built to give her something she never earned. No one had an answer for that. Chloe stood there holding the notice, her hands trembling, her confidence completely gone. So what am I supposed to do now? I looked at her, my voice steady. The same thing I've done every single day for 10 years. Start from nothing, and build it yourself. For the first time in her life, no one rushed to rescue her. Not our parents. Not me. Not anyone. The locksmith restored my original lock that same afternoon. The handwritten sign came down. By evening, the bakery was exactly as I had left it 4 days earlier, except now it felt different, like something precious had been tested and had survived. My father approached me slowly as the locksmith packed up his tools. I never imagined it would come to this. It didn't have to, I said. You could have simply asked me for help, instead of deciding I owed you my life's work. He had no response. A week later, my mother called and asked if we could talk, just the two of us. We met at a small cafe down the street from the bakery. She looked smaller than I remembered, tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. I'm sorry, Emma, she said, her voice breaking. We spent so many years softening every failure for Chloe that we forgot what it did to the people around her. To you. I nodded slowly. I never wanted to compete with my sister. I only wanted to be treated fairly. You deserved that, she whispered. We just didn't give it to you. 6 months later, Chloe took a job as a barista at a small coffee shop, starting from the bottom the way I once had. She called me one evening, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I got promoted to shift lead, she said. First promotion I've ever actually earned instead of been handed. There was something different in her voice. Not entitlement. Pride. That's a good place to start, I told her. That Christmas, for the first time in years, our family gathered without an agenda hidden beneath the surface. No arguments about the bakery. No quiet manipulation disguised as concern. Just an honest dinner, full of the kind of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. My father raised his glass before we ate. I used to think helping Chloe meant protecting her from every hard consequence. I understand now that all it did was stop her from becoming who she was capable of being. Later that night, I stood alone in the bakery after closing, the ovens cooling, the display case empty and wiped clean. 10 years of my life were built into every wall, every worn countertop, every recipe card tucked into the drawer beneath the register. The bakery was never just a business. It was proof of every sacrifice I had made and refused to let anyone erase. Sometimes the people who love us make painful mistakes, mistaking convenience for care. Forgiveness matters. But so do boundaries. Because protecting what you've built with your own hands is never selfish. And that is the one tiny detail on the lease my family almost forgot to check.